Hi, I learn something new every day. Yesterday, or it was the day before, a woman shared a tweet that when women have sex, they release oxytocin, which bonds them to their partner who they're having sex with. And the more men that they have sex with, the less amount of oxytocin is produced, thus the less bonding that comes with sex. So if they've had sex with multiple partners before marriage, they'll have a very hard time, if not impossible time, bonding to their husbands. God told us to flee fornication because it's a sin against our own body. And he commands us for many good reasons, and I'm finding out more reasons all the time as I grow older. The blessings of saving yourself for one man. My mom told me when I was young that I wanted to be able to stand in front of the man I was going to marry and tell him I was going to save myself for him. This made sense to me from a young age. I wanted a godly man. I wanted a solid marriage. I wanted a good marriage. And so I did that. I saved myself for marriage. And I've been married over 42 years. I'm very bonded to my husband. Even when we were going through hard times, I was very bonded to him. I never wanted to have sex with anyone else. I've never had sex with anyone else. I don't want to have sex with anybody else.
And those are the types of comments, generally speaking, that you can expect to hear from virgin wives, particularly if they were raised in some sort of real culture or if they have real beliefs. And she's correct. As we already mentioned, oxytocin is released during sex, which is supposed to help the woman to bond and to stay with her mate. There's also vasopressin being released. There's also dopamine being released. Endorphins are being released. But when they've had sex with multiple men, it's no longer the same. Not to mention, virgin brides don't have the confusion that comes with having other men's DNA, other men's sperm, other men's semen inside their bodies, the chemicals from other men's sperm and semen inside their bodies, influencing their bodies and their minds. We already listened to Elder Thomas Murray and Dr. Gina Murray speak about the topic. We heard Elder Murray state that if we desire to have the right people on the earth, certain women would not be good to procreate with. We've also read on some of the genetic or scientific aspects which align with the biblical and ancient principles that have been established and understood since the days of old. So we're going to read from this article. It says, Fetal Genes in Mother's Blood, a Novel Mechanism for Telegony. And oftentimes you have to go to the East to get this type of information. As you can see here, it's written by Liu Yoxing. And you can see this is from China. Now, I'm not going to read the majority of this article. I'm just going to read a little bit. It says, abstract. Telegony is a discredited genetic phenomenon that a previous male may influence the characteristics of offspring subsequently born by the same female to another male. Although its reality was acknowledged by such authorities as Charles Darwin and Herbert Spencer, it has been met with skepticism because of a lack of understanding of the theoretical basis for telegony. So he said it was acknowledged, but he said it's been met with skepticism because of a lack of understanding of the theoretical basis for telegony. It says, with the discovery of fetal genes in mother's blood, the penetration of somatic cells by sperm, so that's to say that the sperm, when it goes into a woman, it doesn't only go into her ovum. It also may embed its genetic information in other tissues of her body. It says, and the ability of RNA to program genome rearrangement mechanisms might exist for telegony. So I'm going to skip down to the end. Concluding remarks. It says, in the history of genetics, neglect of certain findings and phenomena is not uncommon. For example, both Mendel's work on plant hybridization and McClintock's work on transposable elements were ignored for decades. And for those who don't know, Mendel is considered to be the father of modern genetics by many. It says the phenomenon of telegony is potentially genuine despite its rare occurrence. It says a woman may have, by a second husband, children who resemble a former husband. So this next article says uterosomes, the lost ring of telegony. And as I said, you often have to go to the east. You see that this is from Iran. But it says telegony refers to the appearance of some characteristics of the female's previously mated male in her subsequent offspring by another male. According to evidence, telegony may occur either through the infiltration of sperm into the somatic tissues of the female genital tract or the presence of fetal genes in the mother's blood. So that means, as I already described, the sperm goes not only to the ovum only, but sperm can go in the uterus and lodge itself or lodge its DNA in other tissues of the female, of her genital tract, it says here. And also fetal genes in their mother's blood. Fetal genes refers to genes or cells that come from the fetus that's inside the woman, and it gets into her blood. It says it is highlighted that sperm penetrates into the mucosa of the uterine and possibly alters the genetic structure, affecting the embryo and enduring from one pregnancy to the next, which may be one of the potential mechanisms of telegony. Uterine fluid, uterine gland-derived histotroph supplies key nutrients for successful embryo implantation, and it is important during the first trimester, especially because of its susceptibility to maternal states. The presence of EVs in uterine fluid was reported in mice, sheep, and humans, including a wide range of biomolecules such as proteins and non-coding RNAs. In this review article, we presented a new idea to explain telegony. Based on our idea, after the previous male sperm entry into the female reproductive system, those sperm which do not participate in fertilization penetrate into the somatic cells of the uterus and store their epigenetic information there. And I'm sure some of you brothers are already familiar with epigenetics. An example of epigenetics would be the way you exercise, the way you work out, the way you take care of yourself, the way you eat, passing down to the next generation. It says the sperm of the next partner reaches a location in the female reproductive canal where it exchanges information with the uterosomes and obtains the proteins and non-coding RNAs required for fertilization, development, and implantation. In other words, what it's saying is that when sperm from a previous male enters the uterus, it might change the genetic environment there inside the woman. And what it just explained is that the uterus produces fluid with important nutrients for the embryo, and tiny particles in this fluid called uterosomes contain various biological molecules. The idea is that sperm from the previous male that did not fertilize her egg might still enter cells in the uterus. It may enter other parts of her body and leave behind genetic information. And so when the subsequent male, when her new man arrives and his sperm arrives into her uterus, it interacts with the uterosomes and picks up the genetic material for fertilization of the embryo. In other words, it also picks up some of that material that the other male left behind. So they're saying that this process may explain how characteristics from a previous male could influence offspring of a subsequent male. So reading on, it says telegony, as one of the most interesting genetic phenomena, refers to the appearance of some characteristics of female's previously mated male in her subsequent offspring by another male. August Weismann coined the term telegony and mentioned that sperm had reached the ovary after the first sexual union had occurred and had penetrated into certain ova which were still immature. The maturation of these oocytes may coincide with the second intercourse, which might lead to the birth of offspring. In his classic book, The Germplasm, he described telegony as a doubtful phenomenon of heredity, adding that the reported examples of telegony were based on a misconception, and recommending that further trials be conducted to answer this matter. This is the man, August Weismann, who ostensibly created or made popular the term telegony. And he wrote a book called The Germplasm, where he described it, as it says here, as a doubtful phenomenon of heredity. Now, the issue with Weismann was that his belief was that sperm could reach the ovary of a woman, and that some of those sperm cells would reach immature ovum that had not yet fully developed. And his theory was that when those immature ovum, those immature eggs matured, when they matured later on, they would be fertilized by that sperm that had already entered them. And his theory was that this could take place around the same time that she had sex with a new male. And therefore the offspring would carry traits from the first male. The problem with that is that it quickly became obvious that if this were the case, we should occasionally observe offspring produced without a second male. Because remember, the ovum that were immature were already entered by sperm. So you shouldn't need a second male all the time for that. And so since that doesn't happen, his theory fell apart, and he said it's a doubtful phenomenon of heredity. So he didn't understand the way telegony works, in other words. Romain said of telegony in 1893, the existence of telegony was reported in a wide spectrum of species, such as horses, pigs, goes on to mention multiple sources, dogs, mentions multiple sources, cats, sheep, mice, rabbits, flies, beetles, and humans. And he's mentioning multiple sources that state that telegony occurred. It says in the 80s and 90s, the phenomena of telegony were noted in the immune system of mice and rabbits. First and foremost, I'm not going to try to pronounce that name, et al. In 1983. In 1983, this happened. He reported that aberrant hyporesponsiveness to particular alloantigens in the second generation offspring born to neonatally tolerant male despite subsequent mating with normal non-tolerant males. So do you see what they're explaining here? It says rabbit offspring sired by non-immune bucks and born to doe previously mating with bucks that had recovered from myxomatosis also demonstrated immunity to the myxoma virus in a research done by Sobey and Cannoli. This discovery was later proved by other researchers. So what they just explained is that they had female rabbits, which are called does, that had mated with male rabbits, which are called bucks here. And the male rabbits had already recovered from myxomatosis, and thus they had immunity, or they had built up tolerance to myxomatosis. Who had built up the tolerance? The male rabbits that the female rabbits mated with. Okay? Then later they had these same female rabbits mate with other male rabbits who were not tolerant to myxomatosis. You understand that? And what it's explaining here is that the offspring of the female rabbits who had previously mated with immune males ended up being immune or having tolerance to the virus themselves, which suggests obviously that the tolerance from their previous male sexual partners somehow influenced the immune systems of their subsequent mate's offspring. So remember, the second group of males did not have the tolerance, yet their offspring showed tolerance, similar to offspring of males who already had tolerance. So that's an example of telegony. And skipping down, it says here, the possible integration of fetal DNA stemmed from the mother's previous partner into the genome of the mother's future fetus by a different male may influence the personality of the subsequent progeny. Do you understand what that means? That means that if a woman is pregnant by a male's child or offspring, and she has the fetus inside of her, and so that DNA, those cells, gets into her blood. What this is saying here is that later on down the line, when she gets pregnant by a different male, that male's child can be influenced by the DNA of the previous male's child to the degree that it influences their personality. It says male cells have been found in women with no history of male children or abortion. And we already read about that. It says suggesting that these cells were transmitted from female sexual partners during sexual intercourse. So again, we've already been over the basics of microchimerism. We're going to read a little bit from this article. It says Telegony, the sire effect and non-Mendelian inheritance mediated by sperm, a historical overview and modern mechanistic speculations. And just to break down that title a little bit, when it says the sire effect refers to the influence that a male may have on his offspring, or in this case, the offspring that a female has with a future subsequent male. And when it says non-Mendelian inheritance, that refers to inheritance that may not follow the usual patterns described by Gregor Mendel. Because remember, I mentioned earlier that he is known for his basic rules of genetics, or is called the father of modern genetics. And when it says mediated by sperm, obviously that refers to the fact that sperm may play a role in this inheritance. So we're just going to read a little bit of this article, starting here in this section where it says possible data in respect of the existence of telegony. It says, let me zoom in a little bit. It says, it should be noted that some dog and sheep breeders, as a rule, still adhere to the idea. To what idea? To telegony. And Several sheep breeders associations even refuse to register lambs whose mother were ever impregnated by mating with a common ram. So what that means is among breeders, this is already something that has been believed for much time, to the degree that, as it says here, several sheep breeders associations take telegony seriously, and they account for telegony when they decide how they're going to breed their sheep. It says Zellner observed the phenomenon of telegony in rabbits and argued that telegony did not occur rarely as was previously thought. Do you understand what that means? That means he argued that telegony happened often, that it was not something that's rare. Because some people will say, or at least used to say, that it happens rarely. He said, no, this happens all the time. Interestingly, a telegony phenomenon or sire effect has also been observed in the immune system of mice when normal females and this is similar to the experiment we already read about regarding rabbits. It's almost the same. It says when normal females that had borne at least 3 litters to males made tolerant neonatally were subsequently mated to normal non-immune males. So again, the female mice had offspring by male mice, and these male mice were immune. They were tolerant. That's what it's saying here. But it's saying that later, these same female mice had offspring by other males that were not tolerant. And what does it say? It says the offspring showed a hypo-responsive phenotype that did not differ from that of the progeny of fathers made tolerant neonatally. In other words, the offspring appeared to have immunity or tolerance as if they were the offspring of the previous male sexual partners of the female mice. So this is another example of telegony. It says the response of this offspring was significantly lower than the response of mice born to normal females mated only to normal males. What that means is the response of the offspring to whatever it was that they were testing them with was significantly lower than regular mice whose parents were not immune. In other words, it appeared, as I already mentioned, that they had the immunity or they had the tolerance as if they were the offspring of the previous males that the females had sex with. It says this type of observation has also been reported by Cooper, Willis et al. In addition, Sobey and Cannoli demonstrated that male domestic rabbits mating after recovering from myxomatosis may transmit immunity to progeny born to the female in the next 7 months, including progeny sired by other males lacking immunity. And we already read about that with rabbits. It says this has been confirmed by later researchers. It says, although always largely an animal breeder's issue, telegony is also invoked in ideas about human inheritance. A remarkable illustration of telegony in humans has been observed and recorded, and I should say recorded, by Lingard. It says in which a hypospadian, and a hypospadian is a man who has an aberration with his penis, a deformity. It says in which a hypospadian whose father and paternal grandfather were similarly malformed contracted a marriage with a woman not related to him who bore him 3 sons, hypospadians. So a man who had this malformity in his penis married a woman that had 3 sons with her, and this woman was not related to him. It says he died a few years after the birth of his 3 sons. His widow, within 18 months after his death, contracted a second marriage. The husband in this instance not being a hypospadian and having no history of any such deformity in his family. So her subsequent husband that she married within 18 months later did not have this deformity. He was not a hypospadian. It says by this marriage she had 4 sons, all hypospadians. Do you see that? These are various instances recorded by science of telegony. And there's a reason why this is ignored in today's day and age, why it's pushed to the side, why they act like it's not real. It says Sedgwick believed that this case might help to overcome some of the objections that have been urged against the influence of a previous marriage on the subsequent offspring by a second or even by a third husband. Thompson cited the case of a woman married to a deaf mute by whom she had one deaf mute child. So a woman married a man who was deaf and a mute, and they had a child who was deaf and a mute. It said by a second normal husband, she had a deaf mute child, and then others who were normal. So she got remarried, had a second husband who was normal, and had another deaf mute child. It says there's also evidence for telegony in modern China. For example, 2 Chinese women gave birth to children after they married their second husband. Interestingly, the appearances of their children closely resemble their first husband. We're going to listen to this brief video of Dr. Gina Murray speaking about this topic and about concubines.
And so I belong to my husband. I am just as a piece of land. I produce for my husband a variety of things. And so as a profitable servant, the more I'm able to assimilate to him, the better I'm able to produce the fruit that he wants produced.
Do y'all hear this mindset? Yes, sir.
So the problem with a sister who has baggage, whether it's emotional baggage, mainly from a history of failed attempts at assimilation. When she has failed in the past, it doesn't make her more likely to be successful in the future. It's actually harder the more times she's had a man, different men, because she's got baggage, hurts, traumas. She has the old agenda from these different men, maybe what pleased them and what, if she was with a fool before, the things she did that he approved of, a righteous man would not approve of. And so for that reason, women come to the man in different condition. A sister who is, let's give the best. Ideally, the sister is a virgin, she's younger, and she has no prior failed attempts at assimilation. And most importantly, she came from a home where her father was the patriarchal ruler of that home. If she comes from patriarchy and she obeyed her father, she's in much better condition to easily transfer and that over to her husband. So if a sister, the further away from that ideal a sister is, the less suitable she is to be a wife, and the more she would function on a lower level. And this is all about function. She's not able to function as a wife, meaning 100% submission, 100% assimilation, because she has all these other ideas and all these hurts and all this history. And for that reason, she should count herself fortunate to be considered a concubine. A concubine is still an honorable term. This is not a woman who has other sexual partners. She's exclusive to the husband. He claims her, he recognizes her, and day in, day out, on a practical basis, her treatment is no different than that of a wife. The difference is going forward in terms of inheritance. To the concubine and to the children of the concubine, first, before I go there, let me say this. A concubine can become a wife if she's delivered from the error and the misgivings and the prior agreements and all the baggage that she's accumulated, and she comes to 100% submission, because this is about function, then she can become a wife.
So you heard her explain that certain women should be grateful, should be happy to be accepted by an upright man as his concubine because of the situation that they are in. And that potentially a concubine could achieve the level of a wife. But we know that many modern women today would say that it should not matter if they had a promiscuous past, because they're born again or they're a new creature now that they're in Christ. And to the modern Roman Christian mind, that might sound legitimate, but that's not how the Hebraic or the Torah-based family functions. That's not how real cultures function. That's like saying if you had HIV before you came to the faith and accepted Christ, your HIV automatically disappears because you decided to follow the Bible now. But we know that that's typically not how that works. Or if you were obese and you had a terrible diet before you came to the way, you are now suddenly fit and healthy and attractive, and you've lost all desire for unhealthy foods now that you've accepted Christ, because you're quote unquote a new creature. The concept of being a new creature in Christ is speaking about a spiritual transformation, a renewal of the mind, but it does not magically erase the consequences of past actions or the natural laws of life. And that's why the Torah told you not to do certain things in the first place. That's the whole reason why it's set up the way it's set up in the first place. The Hebraic or the Torah-based family recognizes that while spiritual renewal is crucial, it must be accompanied by tangible changes in behavior, choices, and responsibility. And we understand that not everyone is on the same level, speaking practically. So again, physical virginity applies to women only, scripturally speaking. And when a woman loses her virginity, the man has to pay the virgin mohar and keep the woman as his wife if he takes her virginity, unless her father refuses to give her to him. But ideally, what's supposed to happen is a deal is supposed to be worked out before the man has sex with the woman and takes her as his wife. As it says here in Exodus chapter 22, verse 16, if a man entice a maid, that word for maid is the Hebrew word bethula, that refers to a woman that has not had sex. So it's expected that she's a virgin. It says if a man entices a maid that is not betrothed, so she's not engaged to be married with anyone, she's a single virgin young woman. It says, and lie with her, he shall surely endow her to be his wife. That means if he has sex with her, he breaks her virginity, he has to pay for her to be his wife. Verse 17 says, if her father utterly refuse to give her unto him, he shall pay money according to the dowry of virgins. So he pays the father because the father raised the girl. He invested into the girl, and the girl was also an asset to the father's home. So now that she's of age and is ready to be a wife, the future husband comes along and pays the mohar to the father for this girl to be his wife. Thank you, sir, for raising this fine damsel. Now she's going to come and be a part of my household, of my family, of my father's house. She was an asset to your house, but now she's going to be under my authority. The father is losing an asset, which is a part of the reason why he's being compensated monetarily by the new husband. In other words, there's a purchase being made, and the father transfers his daughter over to the authority of her new husband and the owner. And remember that she's expected to be a virgin. And remember as well that before the deal takes place, the father has the right to refuse the deal because he is her original owner. So again, physical virginity applies only to women. Men are called eunuchs. As it says here in Ecclesiasticus chapter 20, verse 4, as is the lust of a eunuch to deflower a virgin, so is he that executeth judgment with violence. A man is a eunuch, a woman is a virgin. As it says in Matthew chapter 19, verse 12, Christ said, for there are some eunuchs which were so born from their mother's womb. And there are some eunuchs which were made eunuchs of men, and there be eunuchs which have made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. He that is able to receive it, let him receive it. So a eunuch in the broader Hebraic biblical sense is simply a man who is not sexually active or who may be asexual. And it may even be taken to the level of him being physically castrated. And that's what Christ is referring to here, where he said, made eunuchs of men. That's someone who was castrated. This is Deuteronomy 22, starting at verse 13. It says, if any man take a wife and go in unto her and hate her, and give occasions of speech against her, and bring up an evil name upon her, and say, I took this woman, and when I came to her, I found her not a maid. So the word for maid here in Hebrew is Bethula, meaning a woman that has never had sex. So he said, I found out that this woman is not a virgin. Why does this matter? It matters because in general, a new wife is expected to be a virgin, particularly in biblical culture. And if she wasn't a virgin, then the man needed to know that ahead of time, that needed to be divulged ahead of time so that he could take that into consideration when deciding whether or not he wanted to take her as his wife. And also, if she wasn't a virgin, they wanted a full explanation of why not. Either she was a widow or she was divorced. So the man wanted the Carfax. You remember that old commercial Carfax? He wants to know who had this car before me, what did they do with this car, etc. Because if he goes into the marriage thinking he has a 2024 Aston Martin, and he comes to find out that he actually has a Honda, it's going to be a big problem. Verse 15 says, then shall the father of the damsel and her mother take and bring forth the tokens of the damsel's virginity unto the elders of the city in the gate. And as you probably already know, that's the sheet or the cloth that was laid under the couple before they had sex that will contain the blood, that will contain the remnants that show and prove that the woman was indeed a virgin. So they kept that because they knew that that was important. Verse 16 says, and the damsel's father shall say unto the elders, I gave my daughter unto this man to wife, and he hateth her. And lo, he hath given occasions of speech against her, saying, I found not thy daughter a maid. And yet these are the tokens of my daughter's virginity, and they shall spread the cloth before the elders of the city. So as you can see, this is a big deal. The parents even keep the tokens of the daughter's virginity because it's important. And a woman who was not a virgin was not considered to have the same marital value as a virgin. Verse 18 says, and the elders of that city shall take that man and chastise him, and they shall immerse him in 100 shekels of silver, and give them unto the father of the damsel, because he hath brought up an evil name upon a virgin of Israel. She shall be his wife. He may not put her away all his days. So if he lied on her, and the father does have the proof, he has the tokens of her virginity, he has the cloth or the sheet that had her blood stain on it from when they consummated their marriage, he has the proof, then this man must be punished, this man must be fined, and he cannot put away his wife, he cannot divorce her for all his life. Verse 20 says, but if this thing be true, and the tokens of virginity be not found for the damsel, then they shall bring out the damsel to the door of her father's house, and what will they do with her? And the men of the city shall stone her with stones that she die, because she hath wrought folly in Israel to play the whore in her father's house. So shalt thou put evil away from among you. So it's not something that's taken lightly when a woman is a whore. It's worthy of death. And I've often said that I believe modern whores should be locked up. I don't believe that they should be allowed to do what they're doing. I honestly believe that they should be at least put in jail. They should be put in prison, because they're destroying lives, they're destroying children, they're destroying families, they're destroying men, they're destroying society, they're destroying the world. Do you understand that virginity is so important that, as we just read here, after this man lied on her and falsely accused this girl, she still has to remain married to him? Do you know why that is? It's because he's the man who took her virginity. And if she was to leave him, she would essentially be tainted or damaged in the eye of the next man that came along. In other words, since he took her virginity, which is where much of her value lies, he is now obligated to perform his duty as a husband to her. And a part of his punishment is that he can never divorce her, which is what we just read in verse 19. And this is similar to the man who rapes a virgin, as we read toward the end of this chapter. Verse 28, where it says, if a man find a damsel that is a virgin, which is not betrothed, and lay hold on her, and lie with her, and they be found. That's talking about rape. A man who rapes a virgin is forced to marry her and keep her as his wife. And a part of his punishment is that he can never divorce her. And I know that many people don't want to believe that this is talking about rape, but that's exactly what it's referring to. And I have an entire video on Patreon that covers that topic if you want a detailed explanation. And I also plan to do an update video on that topic. But this is actually protection for the woman, so that she's not out here in the streets with no virginity and no husband, which in Hebraic culture is a great shame and reproach for a woman unless she's a widow.